not immediately guess that all of the richness of mental life, of intelligence, of categorization, of language, of planning, of emotion, could arise from the structure of this 3 pounds of flesh.
Your robot's made out of meat, which is what I'm going to try to convince you of today. Robots made out of meat.
Intelligence, language, motion, 3 pounds of flesh.
Robots made meat.
Are you and I really robots?
What you are, what I am, is 100 trillion little cellular robots. Robots.
That may sound scientific, but is it? I spoke with Dr. Michael Egnor, a human brain expert.
And eliminative materialism is an ideological viewpoint, a philosophical viewpoint, but it's not a scientific viewpoint. It is the viewpoint that there is no such thing as the mind. It's not that the mind is explainable by matter, it's just that the mind doesn't exist at all. It exists at all.
The one thing almost everyone accepts is that we actually exist. We're persons, not just a collection of body parts. We have a self, an inescapable I. I have a brain, but I am not a brain. I feel emotions, but I am not an emotion. I think thoughts, but I am not a thought. Who are you? Think about it. Who am I?
Who am I?
Most people feel they're more than their physical bodies. What materialists don't tell you is this feeling is actually supported by science. Recent research has revealed fresh evidence for an immaterial mind, where thoughts actually change your brain. Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz treats people who suffer from obsessive-compulsive disorder. His treatments provide evidence that thoughts can change our physical brains.
By training people, literally training them to reinterpret the feelings that you need to check or that something is dirty, reinterpret it as a false message from your brain. People could, in fact, learn how to understand that this is not me, this is a false message from my brain, and when they did that, their OCD improved and their brain changed. That's the part where you really get the leverage to say you're not just your brain, because choices you make can actually change how your brain works.
This research clearly supports mind over matter. Mind over matter. Further evidence for an immaterial mind comes from an operation known as a corpus callosotomy. In this operation, you literally cut the brain in half by severing the corpus callosum.
It's an operation that I've performed, and their brains were essentially cut in half. But they still seem to be a unitary person. They still seem to be fairly normal. And what that implies is that the human mind is not purely generated by the matter of the brain. Otherwise, cutting the brain in half would have profound effects on the human mind. It might make two people. Certainly, it would create a rather profound difference in a person's state of consciousness, and it doesn't.
A third piece of evidence for an immaterial mind comes from brain stimulation experiments that seem to show our intellect and identity are not found in our brain tissue. Some of the most famous of these experiments were conducted by brain surgeon Wilder Penfield.
He was a meticulous scientist. He repeatedly observed that there were aspects of the patient's mind that no matter what he did to the brain, he couldn't affect. He could elicit memories by stimulating a part of the brain. He could make a muscle move or make a patient have a sensation, but he couldn't change their consciousness. He couldn't change their intellect. He couldn't change their sense of self. That no matter what he did to the brain, remained the same.
A fourth piece of evidence for an immaterial mind comes from experiments about free will. Materialists try to convince us that free will does not exist.
I hope to convince you that free will is an illusion. Free will is an illusion.
But Dr. Benjamin Leibott's experiments show that humans do have free will. At least the free will to say no.
About perhaps half a second before you decide to do something, there's a spike in your brain that he called the readiness potential. It's almost like an unconscious motive.
Materialists have used this readiness potential to suggest that we are misled into thinking we have free will.
Free will is an illusion.
That our material brain just sort of makes the decision. And we kind of think that we decided. But we didn't.
Leibniz didn't agree with that. He asked the subjects to do something more. He said, when you decide to do something, then decide not to. When they did that, he found that there was a readiness potential for deciding to push the button. But there wasn't a readiness potential to decide not to push it. And he said, he didn't prove the existence of free will, but he proved the existence of free won't. And that's what he called it, free won't. That in a sense we have motives that are beyond our control. We can't stop the motives, but we can stop ourselves from doing it.
Materialist scientists mostly ignore this evidence because it doesn't support their worldview.
You are cellular robots.
Materialists are realists, in a sense. They understand that materialism cannot explain the mind. Rather than abandoning materialism, they abandon the mind, which I think is a mistake.
Neuroscience shows that you are more than your brain. This liberating evidence frees us to think rationally about who we really are: body, soul, and mind. We are not materialists. We see the human soul. We experience love. We live with purpose. We fight for justice. We are the quiet majority, and we will be quiet no longer.